northern India, 25 centuries ago. A young Brahmin named Ambattha stands in front of the Buddha, arrogant, sneering. The Buddha asks him a question, a fair one. Ambattha refuses to answer. The Buddha asks again, calm, patient. Ambattha refuses again. And then the Buddha says something terrifyingly calm. He says the old texts carry a warning. Refuse a Buddha's fair question a third time, and your head splits into 7 pieces. Ambattha says nothing. Then he looks up. Hanging in the empty air above him, visible to him and the Buddha alone, a colossal figure burns, thunderbolt raised, waiting for the third refusal. This is Vajrapāṇi. His name means exactly what you're seeing, Vajra in hand, the one who holds the thunderbolt. And this is one of the most frightening appearances in the early Buddhist texts. Tradition says he never left the Buddha's side. Greek sculptors carved him with the body of a hero you already know, and an entire Buddhist path carries his weapon in its name. There's a stone frieze in a museum in London, carved almost 2,000 years ago in a kingdom called Gandhāra, modern Pakistan. The Buddha walks through it, serene, and beside him stands a strong man, bearded, muscled like an Olympian, a club resting on his shoulder, a lion's skin draped over his arm. Art historians recognize the figure immediately. That's Heracles. Hercules. The same hero, the Greek hero, working bodyguard duty for the Buddha, which sounds like a joke until the old texts start describing the job. Why does the Buddha's guardian look like a Greek demigod? The answer is one of the strangest turns in Buddhist art, and we're getting there. First, who is this being? Across Mahayana and Vajrayāna Buddhism, 3 great bodhisattvas stand together. The tradition calls them the lords of the 3 families. Avalokiteshvara, compassion itself. We covered him and her in our Guanyin video. Manjushri, wisdom itself, the one with the flaming sword. We covered him too. And the third, almost nobody in the West can name. Vajrapāṇi, power itself. He carries a weapon whose name means 2 things at once, Thunderbolt and Diamond. Hold that thought. The whole video hides inside it. And one more promise. You've seen this being. You may have photographed him. By the end, you'll know exactly where. Because underneath everything sits a question that shouldn't make sense. The Buddha taught nonviolence. He walked into hostile kingdoms unarmed. He talked murderers out of murder. So why does the most peaceful man in history need a protector? The early texts give him a title before they give him any glory. Guhyaka, the hidden one. The protector nobody sees, until the one moment somebody must. To understand what he is, you need to know what he started as. Because Vajrapāṇi began his career lower than any god. He's a Yaksha, a nature spirit of ancient India, the kind of being villagers left offerings for, so the harvest wouldn't fail, so the traveler would come home. Powerful, unpredictable, the kind of thing you feared meeting on a dark road. That's the origin, a spirit from the wild edges of the map. But he refused to stay ordinary even there. Later tradition raises him from one Yaksha among many, into a lord of Yakshas. The hidden one rose to command the very beings the villages feared. The Pali commentaries go further still. Some identify him with Sukha, king of the gods, the thunder wielder of the Indian heavens. That detail comes back later, with lightning attached. And some legends place him at the Great Renunciation itself. The night a young prince named Siddhartha slipped past the palace guards and rode into the dark to become the Buddha. He was there before the beginning, hidden from the very first night. Think about elite close protection today. Presidents have it. The truly skilled operators are the ones no camera ever catches. The best bodyguard on earth is the one you never see in a single photograph. The Buddha had one who never slept, never blinked, and stood entirely outside the reach of human sight, which only sharpens the strangeness. Kings hired soldiers, emperors built walls. The teacher of nonviolence walked India shadowed by raw elemental power. Why? Why does peace need a protector? The texts answer with a scene, the one we opened with. Time to watch it end. Let's go back to that field in northern India, and this time you get the whole story. The Ambattha Sutta, Digha Nikaya, number 3, one of the long discourses of the Pali Canon. Ambattha is young and brilliant, and completely unbearable. A star pupil of the famous Brahmin Pokhara Sati, and his teacher sends him to evaluate the Buddha. He arrives with his teacher's prestige behind him, and treats the Buddha's whole clan, the Sakyans, with open contempt. He calls them rough and menial, beneath him. So the Buddha asks him a question about Ambattha's own ancestry. Because the Buddha knows something, the old genealogies say Ambattha's line descends from a Sakyan slave woman. The proud Brahmin insulting the Sakyans carries Sakyan blood, servant blood, by his own caste logic. Answer honestly, and his status collapses. His contempt collapses with it. So Ambattha goes silent. The Buddha asks again. Silence. And the Buddha, with that same terrifying calm, reminds him of the ancient warning. Whoever refuses a Tathagata's fair question 3 times, their head splits into 7 pieces. Ambattha looks up and sees him. Vajrapani, blazing in the empty sky. Thunderbolt raised. The Sutta says only 2 people could see him, Ambattha and the Buddha. Ambattha answers the question, immediately. And watch what the Buddha does next, because this is the real point of the whole scene. He tells Ambattha that the slave woman's son, the ancestor Ambattha is so ashamed of, became a mighty sage. He was demolishing the whole idea that blood decides anything. The Sutta ends with his verdict. Birth counts for nothing next to conduct and wisdom. Now, notice what the Buddha did in that scene. Nothing. He made no threat. He summoned no one. He asked a question and stated a fact, the way you might mention gravity to someone leaning over a cliff. The texts stage Vajrapani as something bigger than a bodyguard here. He's the consequence of refusing truth, given a body. The cosmos itself, standing behind a fair question, and this was never his only save. Years later, the Buddha's own cousin, Devadatta, the closest thing Buddhism has to a Judas. We made a whole video about him, hurled a boulder down Vulture Peak to crush the Buddha where he sat. One tradition says Vajrapani shattered it in mid-flight. A rock the size of a cart turned to gravel in the air. You know this force. You've heard it. A parent sees their child run toward traffic, and their voice changes, drops, hardens, becomes something the child has never heard before, and the child stops. The force in that voice is love with its teeth showing. We've been asking why peace needs a protector, and an answer is starting to surface. Maybe this force and the Buddha's peace were never opposites. For centuries, that's what he was. The unseen shadow, the blazing figure in the sky. Then Buddhism reached a kingdom Alexander's empire left behind, and the Dharma handed an artist an impossible job. Give the hidden one a face. Gandhara, the crossroads of the ancient world. Alexander the Great pushed his army through here in the 4th century BCE. He left, but his culture stayed. Greek cities and Greek coins, and generations of sculptors trained in the Greek way of carving the human body. Then Buddhism arrived, and with it, a commission unlike anything these workshops had seen. Carve the Buddha's guardian. Sit with the sculptor's problem for a second. How do you give a body to pure protective force? 20 centuries before anyone drew a superhero, this craftsman faced the exact problem comic artists face today. How do you draw power itself? You give it muscle, a silhouette everyone already knows, an icon the whole audience recognizes on sight. And the Greek tradition had already solved it. The strongest protector image in the Mediterranean world. The hero who strangled a lion with his bare hands and wore its skin as armor. The man who out-wrestled monsters and death. Heracles. So that's what they carved. Walk through the British Museum today and you'll see it. Vajrapani with Heracles' beard, Heracles' muscle, Heracles' lion skin, standing guard over the Buddha. Art historians trace this lineage directly, the guardian of the Dharma, wearing the body of a Greek hero. We told the bigger story of these Greek Buddhists in a video that still stuns people. Alexander's descendants who took refuge in the Dharma. Link below. Now, accuracy check, because this story attracts myths. Alexander never met Vajrapani. No Greek army fled from him. What happened is art history. And honestly, art history is stranger than the legend would be. Greek-trained hands, generations after Alexander, dressed a Buddhist guardian in the strongest protector image their tradition owned. And some scholars push it one step further. They look at that figure and see a different Greek entirely. Zeus, the king of Olympus, whose signature weapon is the Thunderbolt. Heracles' body, possibly carrying Zeus's lightning, guarding the Buddha. And that lightning runs deeper than Greece. The Vajra was Indra's weapon first, the thunderbolt of the old Indian sky king, Indra, Zeus, Thor, cousin cultures across the ancient world, each one putting the same weapon in the sky, each one handing it to their king. Buddhism inherited that thunderbolt, and did something none of the others did. It gave the weapon to a servant, a guardian who kneels to something greater than himself. That choice detonates at the end. The Greeks gave him a body. What Buddhism gave him next was a promotion no being in the cosmos ever matched. That word I asked you to hold, Vajra. Time to open it up. One word, two meanings. The thunderbolt, the force that destroys everything it touches, and the diamond, the substance nothing can destroy. Total destructive power and total indestructibility in a single syllable. Now watch what happens when an entire tradition decides that word describes the awakened mind itself. As Mahayana Buddhism rose, Vajrapani rose with it. The Yaksha became a full Bodhisattva, an awakened being who stays in the world for the sake of everyone still trapped in it. The bodyguard days were over. He became a guardian of the Dharma itself, lord of a whole family of awakened beings, the Vajra family. Then came Tantra, the esoteric path, and the tradition reached for a name that could carry its whole promise, a path fast as lightning, producing a realization hard as diamond. They named it Vajrayana, the Thunderbolt vehicle. The spirit who started as unseen security detail, and now the same symbol he carries gives an entire Buddhist path its name. And in the Tantras, he collects one more title, Guhyaka, Lord of Secrets, the guardian of the hidden teachings themselves. Catch that echo. In the early texts, they called him Guhyaka, the hidden one. Centuries later, he's the Lord of Secrets, the keeper of everything hidden. The oldest thing they ever called him now sounds like prophecy. Now for the story the tantric tradition tells about him. And fair warning, it's the wildest scene in this entire video. First, a frame, because tantric Buddhism speaks a particular language. It often retells older Indian divine imagery symbolically, the way dreams turn inner conflict into gods, demons, and battles in the sky. Keep that lens on for what comes next. The Tuttva Sangraha, one of the foundational texts of Buddhist Tantra, describes the moment a new cosmic order is born. The summons goes out to every god in the universe. Come to the mandala, the great circle of awakening. Every god comes, except one. Maheśvara, the great lord. Shiva himself, one of the supreme gods of the Indian cosmos. He looks at the summons and refuses. Why should the greatest of gods bow to anything? So the mandala sends Vajrapāṇi to bring him. And Vajrapāṇi kills him. The former bodyguard destroys the great lord himself. Pride itself, at cosmic scale, brought down by the guardian of awakening. But the story refuses to end there. And this is the part nobody expects. Maheśvara's life passes through death into another realm entirely. And there, he awakens. He becomes a Buddha. The texts even give his Buddha name, the soundless Lord of Ashes. The scholar Ronald Davidson has studied this myth deeply. Inside the tradition, it's a myth about ego, even cosmic pride ending as a Buddha. Historians add that it was told in an age when Buddhism and Shaivism competed for kings and followers, which makes the ending stranger still. The defeated rival becomes one of the awakened. Even destruction, in this tradition, turns into transformation. The bodyguard had become bigger than the gods he once stood beside. And then, a later northern Buddhist tradition remembers one more scene, the one that breaks your heart. Kushinagara. The Buddha lies between two trees, dying. The teacher Vajrapani, followed through hostile kingdoms and past falling boulders, is leaving. And the tradition says the being who shattered stone in midair, who brought a god to the mandala, drops his vajra in the dust and rolls on the ground beside it, in despair. The one enemy no protector can stop had come, all that power. The Thunderbolt of Indra, the body of Heracles, the name on an entire path, and he could do nothing. A protector who grieves, a weapon lying in the dust. Which drags the question that's been hanging over everything back into the light. Why does a religion of compassion keep a being like this at all? The answer rewrites every scene you've watched so far. Everything fearsome in this video, the split head warning, the thunderbolt, the fangs and the flames of his wrathful form. The traditions that shaped him file all of it under a single word. Compassion. I know. Stay with me, because this is the revelation everything has been building toward. The wrathful deities of Buddhism, and Vajrapāṇi stands at the front of that terrifying crowd, embody a specific idea. Wrath as compassion's emergency form. The shape love takes when gentleness can't reach you in time. Look at what his iconography actually encodes. The Vajra crushes ignorance. The flames burn attachment. The fury aims at delusion, at the machinery of suffering itself. His rage has a target list, and you were never on it. A firefighter kicks down a burning door, axe through the wood, splinters flying, total violence against that door. And from inside the fire, that violence looks like rescue. Because it is rescue. That's the wrathful principle. When someone is trapped in a burning building, in a delusion, in a life collapsing around them, gentleness through a locked door saves no one. Some doors need the axe. And Tibet understood this about him centuries before we did. Across the Himalayas, the three great bodhisattvas travel as a set. The Riksum Gunpo, the three family protectors, enshrined together at crossroads and gateways. Avalokiteshvara, Manjushri, Vajrapāṇi. Compassion, wisdom, power. One household. The tradition itself completed the family portrait we've been building across 3 videos. Tara, who refused every limit the cosmos placed on her, stands in the same fierce tradition. Which brings the Thunderbolt story home. Zeus rules with the Thunderbolt. Indra reigns with it. Every culture that put lightning in a god's hand made that god a king. Buddhism's Thunderbolt kneels, the mightiest weapon in the cosmos, in permanent service to wisdom and compassion. So the question from the beginning finally answers itself. Why does the most peaceful man in history need a protector? Because peace, real peace, is under attack in every human life. Fear attacks it. So does pride. Ask Ambattha. So does everything that hunts a mind trying to wake up. His terror has a direction. He frightens the things that destroy beings. One question left. If he's this important, one of the 3 great bodhisattvas, namesake of an entire path, why have you never heard of him? You have an answer waiting in your own camera roll. At many great Buddhist temples in Japan, there's a gate. And flanking that gate stand 2 colossal guardians, muscled and wrathful, frozen mid-threat. Tourists photograph them by the millions every single year. The Neo. Japan knows them as Shukongoshin, the Vajra-wielding guardians, protectors of Buddhism itself. And they belong to the same stream that flows from the Thunderbolt bearer. Look closer at their faces. One guardian's mouth is open, Agyo. The other's is closed, Ungyo. Ah, and Un. In the old sound symbolism, the first sound a mouth can make, and the last, birth and death, and him, guarding everything between. Across China, Nepal, and the Himalayas, the fierce figure keeps appearing at thresholds. Everywhere Buddhism traveled, he took his post at the door. If you've ever stood at a temple gate anywhere in Asia, you've met him. You walked right past the bearer of the Thunderbolt, and he let you through. Look at the whole arc of him. A village spirit from the dark roads of ancient India, Lord of the Hidden Ones, the Buddha's invisible shadow, given the body of Heracles by Greek hands, his weapon written into Vajrayana's own name, his Vajra dropped in the dust at Kushinagara. Across the Himalayas, practitioners still call on him with 3 syllables. Om Vajrapani Hum. Om Vajrapani Hum. The mantra of power itself, recited for protection, for courage, for the strength to face what hunts you. He picked it back up. 25 centuries later, he's still at the gate, still holding the Thunderbolt, still facing outward, toward the dark. Gates get guardians because what's inside is worth protecting. The teachings kept something at the threshold for 2,500 years. It kept its post. The family is complete now. Compassion in Guanyin, wisdom in Manjushri, power in Vajrapani. All 3 videos are linked below, along with our Lost Greek Buddhists and Vajrayana deep dives. If this channel keeps showing you the Buddhism nobody told you about, subscribe. It helps us keep bringing these forgotten stories to life. And tell me in the comments, what does real compassion need more often? Softness, wisdom, or force? And if you've ever walked through a temple gate past those fierce guardians, now you know who was watching the door. See you in the next one.